Hey guys, Sly here, and before we get into this video, I just want to let you guys know that this is actually a re-upload of a part of a series that I do on my Twitch channel called the Sly Army Tierlists, where we pretty much rank a bunch of just random topics that I'm personally interested in. And so, because of that, these opinions are not set in stone for how I feel about in the current day. And so if you guys want a more updated version of that, feel free to either check out the DeviantArt link down below or tune in on my Twitch that will also be in the description, or check out my Discord where I occasionally post some more updated versions of how I feel about certain topics. And so do keep that in mind. And also make sure to check out the description of the video itself for the timestamps for the particular topic that is presented here. But in any event, I hope you guys do at least enjoy. I recommend you guys listen to this as either like a podcast form or as just something to play in the background. But in any event, hope you guys at least enjoy. Hey guys, Sly here, and welcome back to another episode of the Sly Army Tier Lists. And today we're going to be doing one that is honestly kind of be a bit of a low-key one as far as I'm concerned. And, well, I kind of wish this wasn't actually blocking it, but tonight we're actually going to be doing a video game consoles tier list. So we're just going to be ranking a bunch of the more popular video game consoles that have pretty much existed over the past 5 decades, which is insane. And we'll just be discussing them. So now, before we actually get into this, I actually do want to make a formal apology. Yes, I have not been streaming for the past few days. The last stream I did was, in fact, our Caspian Awards episode, but that's mostly because, well, this week was the beginning of whenever I'm having class. And so because of that, my scheduling is going to be a bit off. So I'm thinking I am going to have to change my schedule to accommodate for it. So that probably is most likely going to mean that I am more than likely going to have to make I am going to have to probably not be able to stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays anymore. It is upsetting because I want to do streams on those days, but here's the thing. I tried to put my classes to where they would accommodate for my channel, right? I made it to where I do those in the morning and the afternoon so that I'm able to get them, be able to get up with you guys. Well, this semester, I think I've realized that no matter what my schedule is going to look like, I'm just going to be a bit too exhausted for me to be able to do proper streams, which sucks because, well, especially for next month, because next month is, single player September for the channel. And so I'm really hoping that it doesn't start compromising streams for that month, because I've got plenty of streams I'm really excited to do for you guys for that. And I really do not want there to be any sort of issues from here on out. But if I have to take breaks, then I will. Rest assured, we will still be having another tier list stream. I don't think it's going to be falling under. No, okay, it's going to be on a Sunday. It's going to be the last Sunday of next month. And so do keep in mind that if I do have bursts of not streaming, that's most likely the reason, is that I'm trying to either recuperate from class or I'm trying to do some classwork, because to me that is extremely important. So it sucks to say, but that is the reality of going to university. So I hope you guys are at least very patient about that, because I'm not going to give up on Twitch. Though I do have an announcement at the very end of the stream that actually is something that is infuriating me, that I will have to talk to you guys about once we're done with this. But regardless, I hope you guys are still having, a good time watching these streams regardless. And yeah, I think we're gonna go ahead and begin with this tier list. So obviously we are talking about video game consoles throughout the decades, and we're going to go through every single generation. Generation 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I've got all the consoles down here. And I've decided, I was doing my research, and I pretty much decided to actually lay down some ground rules for this. So what are we judging these based off of? Because keep in mind that, like, the NES is nowhere near as powerful as, like, a Nintendo Switch. So obviously, I think there should be at least some sort of general rule as to talking about video game consoles, especially since, you know, they're the lifeline of video games for the most part. Obviously, there's PC gaming, as we've got ourselves here, but we'll get to that in a little bit. What defines, like, a video game console, I guess, is kind of the question I'm wanting to answer for this stream. Well, video game console, of course, is a dedicated device that allows the ability to you to play a digital game. That is essentially the very definition of a video game console at its bare minimum. And, well, the shapes and the tech have definitely evolved, because the first video game console was released back in 1972, which of course was the Magnavox Odyssey, which we'll get to that in a little bit. And, well, basically since then, for the past 52 years, we have seen so many, you know, versions of different consoles appear. Some stationary, others portable. What matters is that, well, let's just say that allowed way more easily, it allowed for more accessibility for people to be able to play video games. Since, well, back in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the time you had to go to an arcade if you wanted to play, like, a video game. You had to go to an arcade cabinet at your local, you know, arcade in order to do that. But the invention of an actual dedicated console allowed for people to actually play at home. And, well, that eventually evolved into how we see video game consoles to this day. So, I guess, like I said, I wanted to kind of lay down some ground rules, because I know as far as video game consoles, there are way more than the ones that are on this list. So, I basically boiled it down to, well, like, it has to be like a generally big profile, like, console. So anything that the Wikipedia page had that was listed as a major console release, I decided to put on here. As well as any sort of major handheld consoles as well. Because here's the thing. I really didn't want to rank, like, any of the obviously bad consoles. You know, like the Philips CDI, or like the Nokia N-Gage, or anything like that. Because, well, we all know those consoles are bad. And so, frankly, I don't want to rank them. Plus, there's been plenty of, like, you know, more obscure consoles that I guarantee you probably have never heard of. I mean, let's be real. Unless if you're from Brazil, do you even know what a Zeebo is? Point proven. And so, we're pretty much going to be ranking anything that not only had, you know, major, you know, profile as far as, like, basically had wild scale releases. So that includes things that pretty much released outside of North America, which is pretty much every single one of these consoles, or anything like that. But also, we're gonna rank these based off of how I personally feel about the games themselves, as well as just in general how innovative the console was at the time. And, well, I'm not gonna lie, there's gonna be some personal bias in here, because, well, some of these consoles I hold near and dear to my heart. I mean, the shelf back there is probably spoiling some of those choices, but I digress. And so, I think it's only fair for us to rank them on those bases. And keep in mind that, like, my personal opinion is going to be very different from a lot of others, because ultimately what your favorite console is going to be determined on like when you were born. Because I can guarantee you that like someone whose first console was the Super Nintendo is going to have a very drastically different opinion if their first console was the Wii. So keep that in mind. And of course, as always, this is just my personal opinion. If you disagree with me, that is completely fine. Feel free to let me know down in the comments. And yeah, we're just I think that's all I needed to lay down. I mean, I think that's only fair. Because again, we're only just going to be doing like the high profile consoles. We're not here to do like every individual thing. Because, you know, do you really want to know my opinion on the Virtual Boy or any like, you know, random ass console from before? I don't think you do. So now, as far as how we're going to be ranking these, we're actually going to be doing something similar to what I did with my Call of Duty Zombies tier list 3 years ago, where we're going to be ranking them in chunks. So we'll start with the first generation of consoles, and then the second, and then the third, and then so on and so forth. And also keep in mind that, well, like I said, also keep in mind that while I have not like physically messed around with every single one of these consoles, I have, well, let's just say I've had alternative methods to try to play at least the games on there. So some of which I even streamed. So I'm just preferencing that right now, that this isn't like the definitive ranking, although I think I have enough experience with certain consoles to kind of get a general idea on how like others feel. And so this list, I will admit, is not the most thoroughly researched, but at least I'm being straight up and honest about that, because I'd rather be honest with you guys about how I feel about, you know, certain things. That's what this whole series is about. But anyways, let's, I don't think there's anything else I need to say for now. Let's, jump right into this. So, starting off with the first generation of consoles, we've got, and like I said, I made sure to, look at this through the lens of, like, the major console releases that were listed on Wikipedia. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you the listing I did in a second. Let me just pull it up. Here we go. So on Wikipedia, it generally defines like what's on here. I pretty much listed. I threw in like the handhelds, because for whatever reason they don't list handhelds alongside, even though that there were some pretty big handhelds that were released alongside some of these consoles. But who knows? But either way, I think it's only fair for us to begin with the first generation of consoles, which, like I said, started in 1972. So that was a long-ass time ago. 52 years ago. Has there been since video game consoles have been a thing? But, well, because of that, I basically have very, very, very little experience with any of these. And, well, okay, let's just talk about them. So, we got the Magnavox Odyssey, which, I'm gonna be fair, I'll put it in C tier, only to be fair. Same thing with the Pong consoles. And then we've got ourselves the Coleco Telstar. I'll put that one in like a high D, I guess. So let's discuss these. So the Magnavox Odyssey, that was the first thing that you could define as a video game console, released all the way back in 1972. But, well, here's the thing. It's not really a
video game console that we know of it as now. It's basically like it's more like just basically just a light emitter for your television screen rather than a game itself. I mean, for fuck's sake, you had to, like, the console itself came with, like, hold on, let me see if I can find something. Like, oh, okay. It basically came with, like, TV mats where you put on your screen and you played the game from there. Hold on, let me give you an example of what I mean. If I can find the thing I'm looking for. Yeah, here we go. So imagine, like... Shit, I have not opened this in a while. Goddamn. Okay, so imagine... This is a Warhammer mat, don't worry. But imagine, like, basically just putting, like, a mat like this on your screen. And it was transparent and, like, it had, pretty much the layout of everything, of, like, the levels and stuff like that on the screen. That's basically what it was. Extremely, extremely primitive. And, well, if we were ranking this by modern standards, I would easily put that in F tier, but I'm gonna give it the benefit of the doubt because it's like, you know, Pong was the Pong game, which was like the first successful video game, also released around that same time, so I'm not gonna give it too much shit because of that. You know, it's... There was a long ways to go, is basically what I'm trying to say. Like, there was definitely a long ways to go. 70s tech is definitely a weird... It's like a weird animal, to put it lightly. So... But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on the Odyssey, is that it's just from a different era. And, well, I also have very similar things to talk about when it comes to Pong consoles. Now, this right here is not specifically what they all looked like, because, well, it's in the name. Pong consoles, for those who don't know, were basically just consoles that were dedicated to bringing a home version of Pong, and that's basically all they were. Very much just Pong, but at home. And, well, here's the thing, is that there were like at least like 15 different companies that were making these types of like devices. It was not just one singular thing. It was confusing. They ranged in price, they ranged in size, they ranged in mechanics. It was weird, to say the least. But again, you know, I'm not going to give it too much shit because, well, again, this was very, very primitive. And also keep in mind that, like, you know, it would also take a couple of years until other games would start popping up anyways. So, again, Pong is not the very first video game. That is a huge misconception that people have. Video games have technically been around since the late 50s, but, excuse me, mid to late 50s. But Pong was just the first successful one. And having a device that allows you to play Pong at the time made sense, though these wouldn't particularly last that long. So, that's kind of my assessment on it. And then last but not least, we got the Coleco Telstar, which, again, actually funny enough, this originated as a Pong console as well, but it eventually, you know, became its own thing. And, well, here's the other thing as well, is that this console, was actually kind of similar to the Odyssey, where it was basically just a dot on the screen. And, well, again, I feel like I gotta give it a little bit more of a harsher score because, well, the Odyssey was the first console, but the HAL console basically just did the same thing. it just doesn't really warrant that, in my opinion. So again, my enjoyment levels with these are very fucking low. So I am a little bit biased, but I do try to at least give these a bit of a fair assessment because, well, let's be real here. Most people would only just care about these for like the historical value, and there's a reason why. You know, you don't really hear about the first generation of video game consoles that much. Like, you hear people talk about the Ataris and the Nintendos every day of the fucking week. But that first generation of consoles has just been forgotten to time. And, well, that's why. It's because the enjoyment level was a very, 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 very low bar. So, I hate to be like that, but I gotta be truthful for you guys. These consoles just were kind of, they had their massive problems, though are still important as far as video games are concerned, of course, for very obvious reasons. So, but, well, that then leads us into the second generation of consoles. And, well, this is when they finally actually realized, hey, we don't have to, like, put a light in the console. Like, we don't need to put a light on the screen. We can just digitally, like, calculate it in the console itself. And that's what resulted in the second generation of consoles, which, of course, included, well, the famous Atari 2600, as well as the Odyssey 2, as well as, like, some other consoles in there, like the Intellivision, ColecoVision, and the Channel F. So yeah, like, Atari, Magnavox, which owned the Odyssey consoles, and Coleco, they were pretty much the main three companies at the time. But then we also got Mattel with the Intellivision, as well as the Fairchild Channel F, but we'll get to those. So, Channel F, I'm also going to give this a C tier. The Atari 2600, I'm going to give this one a B tier. The Odyssey 2, I'll give that one a C tier. The Intellivision, I guess I'll give that one also a B tier. And then the ColecoVision a C tier. So, I'm not going to lie. I know very little about the Channel F. I mean, again, I think this was just a console that was just kind of forgotten because this was released in between all those Pong consoles and the Atari 2600. And so because of that, yeah, it was just kind of a bit of a forgotten console. And truth be told, I don't really know like much that came from this. Except, well, for the fact that this was one of the first consoles to actually use... yes, I'm reading the Wikipedia article. I know, I'm sorry. I just don't... I don't know. Like, I will give it credit because, yes, this was the first chip-based console. Because that allowed for you to actually have those, those bit graphics that were a thing. So I will give it credit where credit is due in that regard, but honestly, this pick, it does come from a bit from a perspective of just blatant ignorance because I don't necessarily know what the hell was even on this console. So I could just do a don't know or a who, because I think that if you guys want me to, I might make an addendum with this list later once I do my more of my research. I'll see if I can emulate it on here, but I genuinely have no idea. So that being said, though, even though I'm not confident with that, I am certainly confident that having the Atari 2600 at least in a B tier makes sense. Like, and well, funny enough, well, I mean, it shouldn't particularly surprise you, but well, I remember my Guardians whenever I was growing up. This was actually one of their like that was their first foray into like, video games. Oddly enough. Hell, like I even kept the Atari 2600 that we had. Actually, we still have it. Problem is that it uses a very old cord that only works on like old box TVs, and so we would have to get an adapter if we wanted to actually like play the games in their original state. But well, that's why I got this thing here for me to actually use on my own. So, haha. Which actually, funny enough. Okay, side tangent. Okay, I'll talk about that when I talk about Super Nintendo. But so yeah, like this console, again, I will admit, and keep in mind, I've been pretty vocal about this. I'm not particularly someone who cares about anything from before the 90s as much as like a bunch of other people. I'm someone who's just a bit more, I like something that's like a bit more modern. So anything from like I said before, like the early 90s, I'm very tenuous about my enjoyment of it. There's obviously exceptions. A lot of movies from this time period were pretty awesome, but I guess I'm more so just putting this in a B tier out of just respect because of the fact that this was the console that popularized, the idea of even having a household video game console. And, well, this is kind of the beginning of whenever you started seeing the ideas of like a video game, like sort of franchise kind of pop up around. Of course you got your Space Invaders and your Yar's Revenge and stuff like that. You also got plenty of shovelware games, and that's my, major criticism as well. The Atari 2600 as well, as along with the NES, which we'll get into a little bit. I do have a major criticism of a lot of those consoles basically just, providing a lot of shovelware. So because of that, I am very iffy as far as this console. But just out of respect for, popularizing, like, consoles at home, I had to put it in B tier. So now, as far as the Odyssey 2 is concerned, I mean, I don't think it did as well as the original, did it? Like, because, like, Magnavox kind of, like, they went away from, like, video game, like, consoles that, like, kind of after this. So, well, until, they merged with Philips for a while and they made the CDI. Ugh. So, but yeah, like, again, I will admit it all, like, my judgment here is also based off a little bit of ignorance here because I'm not as familiar with the Odyssey 2. So do keep that in mind. So maybe I'll try to emulate some games, who knows. Now, thankfully, I am definitely more familiar with the Intellivision and the ColecoVision. So these were consoles that were released later on in the early 80s to directly compete with the 2600. The Intellivision, made by Mattel, and then Coleco sought out to use the ColecoVision. And as far as the Intellivision is concerned, I actually have a little bit more of a respect for this one because, well, this might sound weird, but I guess I just more so am interested in this because, oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, Any like sub consoles that were released, I forgot to put this as a rule. Any sub consoles like, you know, the Xbox Series X or, you know, the DSi or, you know, anything like that, I'm not counting those, since those are just, you know, an alternative to to the base of it already existing console. Or yeah, Sega CD, same thing. So I forgot to mention that. But I will say that there was an add-on released for the Intellivision called the Intellivision Voice Modulator, which allowed for voice acting to be used. Granted, very, very primitive voice acting, but I kind of find that to be a bit cool that, like, you know, Intellivision was trying to, or yeah, like the, you know, Mattel was trying to like innovate a little bit when it comes to video game consoles. And so I think because of them trying to, like, you know, innovate a bit more, I have a little bit more respect for it, even if the controller is kind of weird. And, well, I didn't mention controllers quite yet because, well, I mean, I'm just going to be honest. The first controller, at least in my opinion, that feels right to use is a Super Nintendo controller, but we'll get to that later. So, I don't know. It's just kind of weird using like a massive joystick for the Atari, or that weird, like, you know, disc thing with the Intellivision. So, but because this was the early 80s, like, you know, we're still kind of early as far as video game consoles, so I'll give it a pass for now, but I don't know. I guess I just put it more so in B tier for the innovations that, like, they tried at least doing. And as far as the ColecoVision is concerned, I think that one also very similar to the Intellivision. It tried to do some new stuff. I want to say it has like one of the first analog based controllers that ever existed. So I'll give it credit for that, but I don't know. Again, it's just not like, I just don't. I don't know. It's just not. I guess I just kind of prefer the, you know, the innovations that the Intellivision were doing. So yeah, you can probably tell I barely have anything to say about these consoles. Trust me, we'll get to some of them in a little bit. But, well, let's move on to like the last of the second generation, because I kind of forgot to put them on here. So on Wikipedia, weirdly enough, they don't have the 5200 listed as a third generation console. I thought it was a third generation console, but no, it's still considered a second generation for whatever weird reason. But I mean, this console was pretty notorious when it came out, mostly because of that god-awful controller that kept breaking. The games themselves, I think, looked fine, but because of that awful controller, I have to put it in D tier. Borderline F. So I might change it down to F later down the line, but yeah, that was a major problem with this console, is that you couldn't really. Actually, you know what? I'm convincing myself. Yeah, this is the first F tier. If you can't even play your game, why bother? And again, this was supposed to be the follow-up to the 2600. I don't know what the hell like they were thinking with it. Granted, I will give it credit with this controller. It was also an analog controller, which was, you know, a new thing, still a new thing at the time. Although it's kind of weird that it has that weird keypad thing going on. I don't know, the fucking 80s were weird. As far as video game consoles. So, but yeah, like, yeah, I think it's only fair. Like, granted, like, for whatever reason as well, this wasn't listed in that list that we looked at earlier. as far as home consoles. I mean, yeah, like look at this. Oh shit. Is it popped up? Oh, god damn it. Hold on. It's being dumb. Okay, there we go. Yeah, like, it's not listed right there, but I felt like I had to list it because they have the 7800 there, but not the 5200. But you get my point, is... it was a massive flop, and, well... let's just say that, like, it didn't really help the fact that this is around, 1982, 83-ish, which was around the time of the first video game crash. I only say first because, well, there might be a second that's going to come out, in the next year or so, but that's a whole other conversation. But as far as the video game crash in 1983, yeah, part of the reason was because of, Atari's oversaturation of not only releasing too many like games for the 2600, but also having this game like console flop, and well, just having a lack of quality control throughout a bunch of their games. And well, that basically resulted in all of these companies just kind of not wanting to deal with video game consoles anymore. Like, Magnavox, Mattel, Coleco, they immediately left. Like, by 1985, none of them wanted to deal with video game consoles anymore. But, well, that then leads us into our next story about, well, a certain little handheld device that came out in 1980. The Game & Watch. Which, well, it might be primitive, but not only was this a massive innovation as far as video game consoles are concerned, but it was also the gateway for a little Japanese company that has already existed 100 years by this point to reinvest into a different business. Yes, that's right. This was Nintendo's first successful console. It wasn't their first, but their first console is so obscure that like I kind of don't want that. I didn't want to rank it. I don't even know what it's called. Yeah, give me a second. But yeah, no, the Game & Watch was actually the first handheld console ever made. Though, I'm not going to give it too much credit because, well... oh yeah, okay. Nintendo's first console was called the Color TV, but it was only in Japan. So we're not going to rank it because of that. But, yeah, the Game & Watch was a pretty big deal. Okay, scratch what I said about it being the first. It wasn't the first handheld console, but it was definitely the first one that, like, because the first one is called the Microvision, but the Game & Watch, it was a big deal as, it basically was just it was just a system that was better than the first generation of video game consoles, but was handheld. Granted, the major flaw is that, very similar to Pong consoles, you can only really have one game per device. And, well, let's just say that this ultimately was the grandfather to the now notorious Tiger Electronic games. But I'm going to be more charitable with this. So, I'll give it a C tier. Because I do understand its importance. I mean, this thing sold like hotcakes. Like, this wasn't the first console to sell a million. Funny enough, that was actually the Coleco Telestar, or that was the first console to sell 1 million units. But this was definitely the first successful handheld, and I gotta give credit where credit is due. So, and also this was the first internationally released one, so it checks out. And well, that then leads us into the story as far as the third generation of video game consoles, which the charge was mainly led by Nintendo, but as well as Sega, and Atari was still hanging around. So here we go. So the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, regarded as many to being, probably the most important video game console ever made, because, well, this was a massive success in the late 80s. But okay, let's give our rankings of like the other things. So, because we also got the Master System and we got the 7800. I'm gonna put the NES in a B tier. The Master System, also a B tier. And then the 7800, C tier. So, okay. So the NES. Obviously, this is the earliest as far as games that we've played on the channel, because we've played Legend of Zelda. But funny enough, I also remember us playing the NES version of Metal Gear, which is a terrible mistake on my part. But I also remember playing Contra and Castlevania, the originals, for you guys. How even the original Final Fantasy I remember playing for you guys. Which, well, that then leads us into our positive about this console, is that, well, this was definitely the beginnings of, well, franchises that have lasted up until this day. I mean, Super Mario has been around since 1985, technically 1980 if you want to count Donkey Kong as far as, arcades, but as far as the Mario name, actually technically since 1983 because of, Mario Brothers, but whatever. This was the console that popularized Mario, that's for sure. This was also the console that brought us Zelda, and Metroid, and Final Fantasy, and Contra, and Castlevania, and Dragon Quest. Like, this is an extremely important console in that regard. And I do respect it. I just wish that there was more better quality control. Because just like with the Atari 2600, there were a lot of just blatantly really bad games for this console. Like, granted, it didn't necessarily cause an oversaturation like what happened with the 2600 to the point where it crashed the market for video games. As a matter of fact, it did the opposite. This thing helped so that, this console, helped video games be able to recover throughout the rest of the 80s. And so I do give it props for that. And I do give it props for some of the games or some of the franchises it spawned. I just wish that it wasn't a lot of cryptic bullshit in a lot of those games. Because I don't know, man. It just, sometimes it just, a lot of these games from, the 70s and 80s just feel like, I don't know. It's just a me thing. Though, I will admit, I do have a bit of a respect for this console because of what it was able to achieve. And so, I would not put it any lower than a B tier, but I don't think I'm going to put it any higher. That's just me personally. So, because I don't know. I mean, you are talking to someone whose favorite NES game would probably be the original Final Fantasy. So, because I feel like that game overall has aged way better than most other games on the system because of its, mechanics that have lasted to this day. So, that's at least where I'm coming from. And also, there's actually like an actual in-game save battery, so that helps as well. So, but then we've got ourselves, another, titan as far as video games are concerned, rising up a little bit as well. Sega with the Master System, which, to be fair, this isn't Sega's first console either. Their first console was the SG-1000, but again, that never released outside of Japan. So we've got ourselves the first internationally released console here. And, well, I'd argue that it's arguably just as good in a lot of ways. Like as far as like a direct competitor to Nintendo, the Master System did offer a lot in terms of content. I mean, yeah, the controller is very similar to that of the NES's controller. So maybe it's just, I feel like there'd be some lawsuits right there if, we're talking about nowadays, but I do think that it is a, quality alternative and, laid the groundworks for the next generation as far as, the main ones that were competing against each other. And so I think it's only fair to put it in the same tier. But then the Atari 7800, I do think is deserving of a C tier because, it continued a lot of the stuff that, it basically rectified the problems of the 5200, and it's even compatible with 2600 games, which that's something that I think is pretty awesome about this console, is that you could play your old games on this newer system, which was sort of the beginnings of the idea of backwards compatibility, something that I'm a huge advocate for. But yeah, unfortunately, it didn't really last too long. And that sucks because, let me rephrase that. It didn't have the same success as the Master System or the NES. And so because of that, it wasn't really all that innovative anyways, other than improving the graphics a little bit, but that's about it. So I think it's only fair to put it in this C tier. So, all right, then that leaves us into the 4th generation of consoles, which is about where, at least in my opinion, the game quality overall started to finally go up to the standards that we know of nowadays. Which, of course, begins with the TurboGrafx 16, released in Japan in 1987, but it came out in North America in 89. And I feel bad, but I feel like I'm gonna have to put this in D tier. But got ourselves Sega Genesis, because Genesis does what Nintendo don't, and I'm gonna put this in A tier. But then we've also got the Neo Geo, which I'll put that one. I've been putting a lot of these in C tier. I just don't really have a lot to say about these. But the Super Nintendo, I'm going to put that shit in S tier. So, TurboGrafx 16. Yes, it was the first 16-bit console, but it was a weird one because it just didn't really have the support that they were wishing for. And I think that's ultimately what this console's, downfall is, it may have improved in certain aspects as far as graphics, but it just didn't have the games. And if you don't have your games, then, I'm gonna give you some shit. So, And it also doesn't help that, like, yeah, no, these controllers, man, like, by 2000, like, not 2000, by 1989, you would expect there to be, like, a more smoothed out controller, but not anything that's bulky like that anymore. But, well, I guess they just didn't get the memo. So, and, well, before I talk about the Genesis, I'm also going to throw in my, thoughts on the Neo Geo. It's a very similar thing. Actually, as a matter of fact, I am probably going to also put this in a D tier. Because, I mean, look at that. Look at that controller. I'm going to zoom in for you guys on that one. Look at that. Yeah, the left thing, that's the controller for the Neo Geo. It's a fucking beast for whatever stupid reason. I mean, I don't think it helps with the fact that, like, this isn't actually technically a console. It's more so just a shrunken down arcade machine that they just so happen to put into a console form. It's confusing. It's some weird tech. But, well, it also doesn't help that this game also had the same problem that the TurboGrafx had, is that they just did not have enough games to really justify buying this console. And also, this thing was expensive as shit if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, like, how much did both of these even cost at the time? Yeah, like 650 at the time. Like, oh my god. Yeah, no, D tier. Easily. Oh my god, that is so bad. That is so bad. Dude, to put this in perspective on how much that costs in 2024 money. Hold on, let me look at the conversion. Yeah, that's $1,500 in 2024. Okay, I'm putting that in F tier, actually, as a matter of fact. I'm putting that in. That is way too expensive. I know people give shit about to the PlayStation 3 for being too expensive, but this is 1990 we're talking about here. There is no excuse. By that point, hell no. Oh my god. Wow. Yeah, that's bad. That's really bad pricing. So, yeah, the TurboGrafx didn't even cost that much. It cost the same amount as a Super Nintendo at the time. So, no. So, I guess this battle really does boil down between the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, which is the reason why you see both of these consoles talked about more so than the other two. It's because, well, TurboGrafx didn't have the support, and the Neo Geo was way too fucking expensive. So, let's talk Genesis. So, the Sega Genesis, this console was, honestly, I'd argue that, like, yeah, the Genesis, honestly, was the first video game console that was genuinely really good. It had great graphics for the time, but also the games themselves, I would argue, are way more memorable. Because, obviously, Sonic came from this, but it wasn't just Sonic. That was pretty cool. You also had funny enough, a lot of, like, licensed games were surprisingly pretty good on the Genesis for whatever reason. Especially, like, the Ghostbusters games on here and the Home Alone games, for whatever weird reason, they were actually pretty good on here. Also, you've got your guilty pleasures that came from this. Like Ego the Dolphin and stuff like that. And yes, there was also the weird experimental add-ons like the Sega CD and the 32X, which I'm willing to give the CD a pass since, CD-based consoles were still pretty new for the time. And there's some cool stuff on the Sega CD. The 32X was pretty dumb though. I will trash on that, especially considering that the Saturn was already out in Japan by that point. So, but as far as the console itself in its purest form, I would argue that no, this is like the first genuinely really good console. The NES is a very important console, and I do respect it for that, but the quality of the games really do taint it for me. Whereas with the Genesis, the game quality was way higher. It wasn't even a contest. But then that leads us into the Super Nintendo, which, well, I put it higher. But why do I put it higher? Well, by the simple fact that this console is basically, in my opinion, what the NES should have been. And generally speaking, the quality of the games, this is where you start seeing, at least in my opinion, where you could argue that games were basically becoming how they are now. Where, you had extremely fleshed out experiences, whether it be in the platformer category or the run and gun category or even the RPG category. There were a lot of role-playing games that were made for the Super Nintendo. I mean, Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6, anyone? Or like the Secret of Mana, Chrono Trigger, excuse me. A bunch of other ones that I can probably not think of, but like you get the point. Is the Super Nintendo offered a lot for its thing, and well, in my opinion, is where we laid the groundwork for pretty damn good controllers. So Sega Genesis was also a pretty good controller, to be fair, but like I don't know, like every time that like I boot up my Super Nintendo here, obviously this is the Super Nintendo Classic, but every time I boot this up, like I just can't help but just kind of appreciate that they took the core of an NES controller and made it a little bit bigger, but then added in 2 new buttons on here and then 2 trigger buttons down here. It just feels natural, like, and it's helped by the fact that the games, for the most part, with a few exceptions, of course, they're still very crap. Like every console has their crappy games, believe me. But like, I mean, you guys saw me play through Super Castlevania 4. Yeah, that game is hard as fuck still, and I personally prefer the Metroidvania styles of Castlevania games. But as far as like even just playing some of the other games that were on here, like Super Mario Bros., Super Mario World, Link to the Past, Super Metroid, Star Fox, F-Zero, I had a lot of fun here. And of course, as I said, F-Zero and Star Fox, they were on this bad boy. Which that then leads us into the fact that this thing was even capable of 3D graphics. Very, very, very selectively 3D graphics. But the fact that this thing even had the ability to do so, I gotta give props where are due. And in my opinion, this is actually Nintendo's magnum opus console. It's weird to say, but I think, in my personal opinion, they peaked with the Super Nintendo. Not that they haven't done really good stuff. They've always done pretty good with Zelda. I enjoy Mario Kart. But I don't know. I guess I just have an appreciation for this console because, in my opinion, this is probably the most timeless video game console ever made. And I say that because, well, the 4th generation of consoles is where we started seeing a lot more detailed sprites. Basically, like, actually, okay, let's back things up a little bit. You guys and let's talk about PC for a little bit. I'm not ranking PC on here because that wouldn't be fair. But you know how like a lot of indie games for the past like 15-ish years, they've been like pixel art based, and there are some that a lot of people consider to be some of their favorite games of all time. Stuff like Celeste or Noida, or like stuff like Dave the Diver and stuff. That's not really an indie game, but you get my point. Is that there's like a lot of like these pixelated like games, even something like the Octopath Traveler games. Well, a lot of that art style was heavily inspired from specifically this era of gaming. The Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo, in my opinion, is where you started to basically have the systems in which we know video games today. There were still definitely, it still feels like a console from the early 90s, but in my opinion, I don't think a lot of games from the Super Nintendo are going to age. Like, this is a console that has aged pretty damn well, and there's a reason why I ended up buying a Super Nintendo Classic for myself. Because, it's just a console I do appreciate. And I think it's only fair that I give props to both the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo. So, that's just my personal opinion, at least. And yes, I did mod the hell out of that. Which, actually, speaking of, as I was alluding to earlier, bringing up the Atari, yes, I modified my Super Nintendo so that I can actually play pretty much any 2D console. So basically all the consoles we just talked about, I can pretty much play on here. And funny enough, you can actually put a Wii Nunchuck controller in the slot here, and you can literally play Atari 2600 games using the nunchuck as if you were playing it with the original controller, which I find pretty hilarious. Yeah, there's an extra button here, but like, the Z button still work. Yeah, the Z button works with the one button that was on Atari games. So I'm pretty much set as far as that's concerned. I can't do light gun games, unfortunately, but I don't know, maybe there's some sort of an add-on that allows me to do so, but I'll have to look that up later. So yeah, in my opinion, Super Nintendo, fantastic console. But then that leads us into handheld consoles again from the 4th generation, because, 3rd generation, we didn't see any major releases as far as those consoles for whatever weird reason. Well, I'd argue that's partially because, well, they were kind of cooking in the background to see what they could end up making for handheld devices. And that resulted in the Game Boy, the Atari Lynx, and the Sega Game Gear. Which, this is going to be a very controversial pick here. So, the original Game Boy. It's a boy that is a game, and you put the game in the boy. That sounded terrible. I am so sorry. God damn it. Why did I say it like that? God, that was awful. I never said to take these lists super seriously. But anyways, I gotta be the one to say it. Out of these 3, Game Boy is the weakest. It's not inherently a bad console, but I do think it is the weakest out of all of these that you have here. So, I'm putting this in a low C tier. The Atari Lynx, I'll put this in a mid C. And Game Gear, I'm gonna put in B. Yeah, I fucking said it. So, my issues with the Game Boy mostly do stem from, well, the lack of, like, visual clarity on the game itself. Or just any of the games. It does have some cool, unique exclusives. Like Link's Awakening, I do think a lot of people do regard as being one of the best exclusives for the console. Also, Pokemon came from this, but you guys know how I feel about Pokemon personally. Oh wait, no, those are Game Boy Color. No, those were Game Boy. Very, very late Game Boy though. But anyways, yeah, I don't know, man. Just Game Boy, the original Game Boy. Wait, hold on. I have to double check. Okay, they were Game Boy. Okay. Late Game Boy, but I don't know. I don't know, man. It's just like a lot of the games were just extremely flawed for this console. It also didn't help that this console was notorious for a lot of inferior ports of a lot of consoles, of a lot of like games that were released on the NES and the Super Nintendo. Like, I don't know. Like the way to describe the Game Boy is it's basically just it's a handheld NES minus, and that's essentially like how I see it. It's not bad. As a matter of fact, like it's cool in certain aspects, but like don't expect me to be praising this game console too much. It also doesn't help that this lasted way too long. It overstayed its welcome, which we'll talk about the Game Boy Color later because I think there's enough differences between this and the GBC to where I can rank Game Boy Color. But I don't know. Like, it was kind of hard messing around with some of the games that were on here, even trying to emulate it. So, and then that leads us into the Atari Lynx. So instead of working on a, home console, Atari decided to make a handheld for the 4th generation. And, well, it was also pretty deeply flawed. Granted, it did have a color screen, to be fair, but it was way too bulky. It was way too expensive for the time, and it required more batteries than the Game Boy, and it drained them faster. So I guess you can only really give and take. But then that leads us into the Game Gear, which I do think is a console that is worth a bit of recognition. As far as handhelds are concerned from this era, I do think that it's funny enough, the one that has aged the best. Because I feel like, it was big enough to where you can actually see the screen. It had a light up, color screen so that you can actually see what's going on. And the games themselves, I think, funny enough, work on their own without having to make a ton of compromises. It's essentially just, also basically just a Sega Master System or like an NES, just portable, but actually that. So, good job, Sega. You actually did pretty good with your handhelds. I just kind of wish that, you didn't crash and burn in the second half of the 90s. Which, of course, then, well, leads us into the next generation of consoles. The 5th gen. So, and by the way, we are actually going through this faster than we've done on most other tier lists. Damn. So, 5th generation. So, funny enough, people mostly associate the 5th generation of consoles as being a late 90s thing. But the weird thing is that, in the mid 90s, since 1993 is whenever this generation was around. Because the 4th generation was around since 1987. Even though, most people associate the 3rd generation for being pretty much that era. So, and this is where we started seeing 3D graphics become way more common. Yeah, the Super Nintendo was technically capable of 3D graphics, But those were super, super limited to very specific games. Donkey Kong Country and Star Fox were basically the only games that really took advantage of that. But that then gets us into the console we've got here. So the 3DO. I'm gonna put that in, I guess, a D tier. Same thing with the Atari Jaguar. I don't know. They're just kind of whatever. But the Sega Saturn, despite the fact that it got it didn't do as well as the Genesis, I'm gonna put that in B tier. The PlayStation, I'm gonna put that in A tier. And well, this is the part of the video that everyone gets mad at me about, because every tier list pisses people off apparently. N64 is going into the C tier. Like, I'm just saying the truth. But let's go over the 3DO and the Jaguar first. So, 3DO. This was the first of the generation. Who was the company who made this one? Was it? Yeah, who was it? Panasonic. So this was Panasonic's sort of, I think, return to the console, because they had some minor consoles released in like some of the previous generations, but this was like them trying to like push through a little bit. And yeah, this was like the first kind of decently successful CD based console. Problem is well, again, this was still way too expensive for the time. This was a $700 console in 1993. Who the hell has that money? No one has that money. So again, the mid 90s just had that problem. The early to mid 90s just had that problem of, consoles being released for way too fucking much money. Like, again, we'll get to the PlayStation 3 once we get to it, but I don't think that situation was nearly as bad as some of these numbers. Because, again, that costs around, let me double check the math. Yeah, that's again $1,500 in 2024. Like, why are you doing that? Like, it's like these companies didn't know how to make consoles. So yeah, I'm sorry, but way too expensive for the time. I can't justify it. And well, truth be told, the Jaguar had similar, they had also had problems. So this was Atari, foray into consoles again, home consoles. But notice that this is the last one that they tried doing. This was their last hurrah. And it fell flat on their face. Now, this console wasn't actually that expensive. It was only $250 at the time. But then you also realize that, well, this had the same problem that the TurboGrafx 16 had. It just did not have the support that it desperately needed for the time. It also didn't help that it has that god-awful controller. Oh my god, do you see that? What the fuck is that, pancake-looking thing on... I mean, look at this. That's the controller for the Atari Jaguar. What the fuck? It also doesn't help that, this, similar to the Genesis, it had that awful, CD add-on that didn't even work. So that certainly didn't help things. So yeah, not as embarrassing as the 5200, to be fair, but like the writing was on the wall for Atari by this point. There was no way they were going to get back into the console business, or at least in the way that they were. Like, and well, basically since then, Atari has basically just been more of a publisher than they have been like an actual video game company. They have published some bangers since then. Unreal Tournament 2004 being a surprising game I didn't even know was published by Atari until like a few months ago, funny enough. But other than stuff like that, yeah, Atari was basically just done by this point. And well, it didn't really help that their competition was kicking their ass. Case in point, Sega Saturn, which I know this console was not as successful. And well, this then starts getting us into the conversation about the video game console curse, which it basically goes along the lines of something like this, where people have noticed, and we'll get to some of these consoles later, where basically every company's third consoles thus far have basically been duds in the eyes of many. Sega Saturn being one of those consoles. In this case, for Sega. It just, for whatever reason, just could not grasp people like the Genesis did. And I don't think that's entirely fair. Because, well, this console brought us some absolute banger franchises. I mean, first of all, there was a little franchise that came from this console that, I don't know, you may or may not have heard of. It's called Tomb Raider? Yes! Even though most people may think of Tomb Raider as originally being a PlayStation 3, it was actually on the Sega Saturn before it was ever touched on the PlayStation 1. Which to me is pretty insane. So, granted, I don't know how well it plays on the Sega Saturn. But I guess it really just goes to show that, like, oh yeah, and also, yeah, this was also the beginning of the Virtua Fighter, or not the beginning, but like this really did ramp up the Virtua Fighter franchise for them. Also, this was the beginning, yeah, Panzer Dragoon started here as well. So, I think it was just, I think part of the problem as to why this console just did not do as well as it should have, I think it basically boils down to the marketing. Because the marketing was terrible for this. And, well, I think people were also just getting annoyed with a lot of the weird experiments that Sega was doing on the Genesis at the time. And so, yeah. And, well, that, and also E3 1995, where they announced that the console was going to be like $299. Or, wait, no, hold on. No, that's right. Yeah, Sega announced that it was going to be $399. But then, immediately after, Sony had their press conference for the PlayStation, and they announced that the price of the PlayStation was $299. I think that speaks volumes. And that sucks. But then that gets us into our next console here. The PlayStation. Which, I think I mentioned to you guys plenty of times before. I owned an original PlayStation at one point. But, well, I don't own it anymore. My cousins kept it. But I ended up getting myself a PlayStation Classic. Which, yes, I did also modify it so I can actually play a bunch of PS1 games. Yeah, this thing launched like crap, but in the long run, this actually was a pretty well worth purchase. And I got this for only $60, which is insane. especially with the price hike that this thing has experienced, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, no, this I do think is a very damn good console in many aspects. I mean, funny enough, this was originally supposed to be a CD add-on to the Super Nintendo. Yes, the Super Nintendo. But, well, that deal with Sony fell out, and, well, we got the PlayStation out of it. And I think that was for the better, because we got ourselves Crash Bandicoot, we got Spyro here, we got Resident Evil from this, we got Siphon Filter, Metal Gear Solid, anyone? Like, we had some absolute bangers come from the PlayStation 1. And it also helped that, well, this was way more affordable than the other consoles that were CD based at the time. And, well, with that listing of games, that can pretty much tell you that this console had a wide variety of just games available for all ages, which is something that I think was definitely a major positive and a good shift for the time. Because, you know, before the 5th generation of consoles, most people associated, video games as being very childish. Like, you couldn't really, make it mature. It's just a kid's thing. But then, once games like Mortal Kombat, Wolfenstein, and Doom proved that, yeah, you can make video games more mature, I think that started to kind of reflect on, the console games themselves. Because in the latter half of the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis wave of, games, they started to ramp up the maturity level a little bit. And, well, we saw that with the PlayStation 1. And that has resulted in, like I said, some of the best games ever made coming from that console. And, well, I'm a little bit biased. I mean, look at that. I have a PlayStation 1 hat back there. Shut up. But it's a console that I respect, and it would also lead to the other PlayStation consoles, which of course we'll get into it a little bit. It's just something that I do respect. Which unfortunately is not much I can say about the N64. I'm sorry, guys, but I just... Okay, I understand why people do like this console. Because, this was the console that brought us Super Mario 64, hence the name. Mario Kart 64, also hence the name. And Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. I respect the hell out of Ocarina of Time. Do I consider it to be the best game of all time? Not necessarily, but I can see why a lot of people do. And, well, what else came out on the console? A lot of people like Banjo-Kazooie. It's not my thing, but a lot of people do like it. What else? I mean... there was, Oh, okay, Star Fox 64 too, okay. But you seem part of the problem. This console did not get that much support. People who do praise this absolutely love the games that came from it. But this console didn't really have that many games that were released on it. I mean, I'm going to put things into perspective for you guys. So, you see this thumb drive here? I use this to pretty much be able to put on any PlayStation 1 and 64, Sega Saturn, or PSP game onto my PlayStation 1 right there. This is a 256 gigabyte thumb drive here. What if I told you that the combination of every single game that has been released on the N64 is on this thumb drive, and they don't even take up 5 gigabytes on this thing? And keep in mind that most of the games that are on here are PlayStation 1 games, and most of those games are like minimum half a gigabyte. That should tell you not only the actual, like, you know, fidelity of the games themselves, but also just how many games were even released for the console. It was a cartridge-based console that was released in an era where everyone was starting to switch over to CD-based games, or disc-based games. And well, that then gets us into the other problem. The controller. I have stood by that this controller is ass. I remember 10, 11, 12 years ago, back in like, I think 5th grade-ish, like around there, like basically, okay, maybe not like, I guess more like 15 years ago. Whatever, late 2000s, early 2010s. I don't remember specifically, but I do remember around that time. I do remember playing, I think it was, yeah, Mario Kart 64 on the Super Nintendo. Or not the Super Nintendo, N64, God. And back then, I did not understand the controller. Because of the weird fact that the joystick was in the middle of the controller, and then you had like a trigger button behind it. But then you, like, you know, for some games you had to position your hand like this, other times this, other times this. Like, it was a confusing mess of a controller that may have been a controller that would have been fine on paper, but in practice makes the user way more confused than actually, you know, enjoying the experience. I don't know what the hell happened, because, dude, you had an amazing controller set up here. The Super Nintendo controller, which all you could have done is, instead of having the analog in the middle, just replace this with the analogs, or shit, just have like the analog, you know, closer to the middle of the console, not jutting out like a sore thumb. So yeah, which, by the way, speaking of the Super Nintendo controller, you want to know why I praise the PlayStation 1 controller a lot? Look at these. They are actually not that different when you look at them. Yeah, the PlayStation controller, the DualShock controllers. Okay, this isn't the DualShock, but like, you know, whatever. Their basis comes from the Super Nintendo controllers. That's why I love this controller, because this was the basis for, like, this controller right here is the basis for every single controller that was released in the past 35 years. Like, you know, just minus the analog sticks. I mean, look at the PlayStation 5 controller. You can trace the origins of both the Xbox Series controllers and the PlayStation 5 controllers to this bad boy right here. Because it's such a perfect design. Like, why change a design that was so damn good? Especially considering, I think what is really telling is that with the GameCube controllers, I know this is not officially a GameCube controller, but like, you know, they went back to a similar design philosophy, which I think, like, to that controller. So I think that says it all right there. That even Nintendo realized that they fucked up. So if it weren't for the games, I would easily put this in F tier. No question. But because of the games, I had to raise it up. That's how much I hate this console. but I'm willing to give it credit because of, you know, the games themselves. And, well, unfortunately, there's going to be Nintendo fanboys that are going to be pissed off about me, but, well, too bad, because I've already fucking probably, like, turned off the comments for the re-upload here, but anyways. But then that leads us into the sole handheld console that was released for this generation. So Sega and Atari dropped out of the handheld race, and that basically led there to only be Nintendo to basically monopolize on that for a while. What did we get out of it? Well, we got ourselves the Game Boy Color, which basically is what the Game Boy should have been. Problem is that this was released a bit too late, in my opinion. Because, well, the Game Boy originally released in 1989. Game Boy Color released in 1998. It should have been released at the latest 1995, not 1998. That being said, I do like the Game Boy Color. I'm going to put it in B tier. I mean, I do think that overall, because it is in color, and also it actually does use a different chip than the original Game Boy. Like, it actually is an enhanced version. So because of that, I do consider it to be a completely different console. The games play very differently. There's a lot more smoothness as far as movement in a lot of the games, and just general control wise. And so I do consider Game Boy Color to be different, as opposed to, the DSi being different from the Nintendo DS, or, the Series S being different from the Series X, and so on and so forth. So because of that core difference, I'm willing to recommend you guys check out the Game Boy Color. Of course, this brought us some amazing games. Obviously, Shantae comes to mind, even though that came out very late. But also some other games. A lot of the ports of a lot of NES games that were put on here, I do find to be pretty damn good in their own right. This console also had a few decent exclusive RPGs that were on here. And so it has some, I think it warrants a bit more credit. I just wish it was released earlier. Because again, this came out in 1998. Again, this seems like it should have been something made in 94 or 95 at the latest. So I don't know what the hell Nintendo was thinking. Again, the N64 being the third console in Nintendo's roster, sign of bad news right there. But then that gets into the 6th generation of consoles. Now, this is where we start getting into the familiar okay, to be fair, I'm familiar with the PlayStation 1. But this is where we start getting into the era in which I definitely grew up in. A lot more so. PlayStation 1 a little bit, but this era in particular is my bread and butter. So, Dreamcast. I'm gonna put you... Okay, this one's tough, because the support for this console was cut off way too short. But if I were to judge, I'll put this in... I'll put this in a C tier. Oh. He's fine. PlayStation 2, though, it should not surprise you guys. But also, GameCube. And the Xbox. There you go. So, Dreamcast. This is a difficult console to really discuss because, like I said, Sega cut the support for this way too short. This only had, like, what, 2 years worth of, like, support, which is pretty sad because I actually do respect this console as well. But again, this does have the problem of having a very bulky controller, which I think was part of the problem. The other part of the problem is, well, the Sega Saturn did not do well, and that kind of made people not particularly trust Sega. And, well, because of that, support for this console was just cut way too short. And that sucks, because it's like, you know, it's a cool it's a cool console, like, at least in concept. You know, even, like, having, like, the memory tied to the controller itself, I think that's pretty cool. I just wish that, like, the games weren't fucking weird, you know? Like that Seaman game, or like, you know, Sonic Adventure 1. I think 2 was also on here, but like, it was barely ported. I don't know, it just didn't really catch on the eyes of gamers at the time. People fucking love this console now, but in the early 2000s, late 90s a little bit even, it just did not click with people. And, well, that resulted in Sega, you know, moving away from consoles from that point onwards and being a publisher. Which, to be fair, some amazing things came out of that. Total War came out of them post-console generation stuff. The Yakuza franchise also post-console 2 Point. So Sega was able to do some pretty good things. But imagine in a weird alternate timeline where the Dreamcast lasted until 2005, and then whatever new console they would have made, they would have easily made Yakuza an exclusive to whatever that console would have been. It's a weird alternate timeline to think about, but that's all I honestly gotta really say about it. Is that it's a console that I do respect. I just wish that, like, it lasted a bit longer. So that's just me personally. Thankfully, though, that then gets us into my personal favorite console of all time, the PlayStation 2. Need I say more about the PlayStation 2? I don't even think I need to, because everyone knows that the PlayStation 2 is a fantastic console. It is still, to this day, the most sold video game console of all time. I don't think any console has performed it. There have been that have gotten close. There have been some that have gotten really close. Yeah, like the Nintendo DS and even the Switch. Both of those consoles got very close to, like, selling as many units. But even to this day, PlayStation 2 still reigns supreme. And, well, there's a ton of reasons for that. Obviously, I'm not going to repeat, like, everything else that everyone else has said. Like, it had amazing games. The controller was basically just the same as the PlayStation 1 controller, except DualShock packed in right from the get-go. It was also a DVD player for $200, which is a steal for the early to mid 2000s. You guys have no idea how big of a deal that was. And well, it spawned my boy back there. So it holds a lot of memories to me. But I do genuinely think that it is a very, very, very important console. And really did help kind of move the stigma of video games away from being something childish to being something that's just kind of the norm. Like, we saw that a little bit with the PlayStation 1, and even the Sega Saturn a little bit. Hell, plenty of PC games at the time were even doing that. But I think by this point, this was the beginning of the end of that stigma of, video games. And that's something that I will always give credit where credit is due. And I mean, well, you see my collection back there. I've got a whole row and a half of PlayStation 2 games right there. It is my baby. It is the thing that I've cherished the most. And I have had both versions of the PlayStation 2. I had that one on the picture, and I have the Slim here. So, yeah, like, I have, I mess with both PlayStation 2 models. And I think both are fantastic and serve their purposes. So, amazing console. All around. No one is going to argue with me on that. So, hell yeah. And you know what? I'm also going to give some credit where credit is due with the GameCube. The Nintendo GameCube is a fantastic console that did not get the respect that it deserved back in the day. Because, well, people tend to forget about this, but a lot of the problems that people had with the N64 were the same problems that I did. And as a result, people didn't really care as much except for the diehards, and people ended up just getting PlayStations and eventually PlayStation 2s instead. The GameCube just, unfortunately, for whatever reason, just could not click with people, which is a crime because this is an amazing console that Nintendo was able to produce. I mean, first of all, of course, the controller, much improved compared to the N64. It actually is a proper controller. So you can actually, play your damn games properly. But also, this console had some of the best exclusives that Nintendo has ever released. I mean, a lot of people swear by Luigi's Mansion, but I'm also someone who swears by Eternal Darkness, one of the best survival horror games ever made. Also, a bunch of other cool games, like Mario Kart Double Dash came from this. Wind Waker, Zelda. And, I mean, let's also not forget that this was the era in which there was the Nintendo Rock Tour back in the mid-2000s, where a bunch of bands ended up helping them promote the console. Look it up for you guys. Look it up for yourselves. That was a thing back in the mid-2000s. But whatever, you get my point. This is a console that finally in recent years has gotten the love that it deserves. I just wish the prices were way cheaper. That's why I have to emulate on my Wii, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So, absolutely fantastic console. And, well, that then gets us into the Xbox 360. Or not Xbox, the original Xbox. Which, this is Microsoft's first foray into the console line. So, which, it's kind of weird thinking about that. That since the early 2000s, it has basically just been Sony versus Nintendo versus Microsoft. That's the dynamic ever since. There hasn't been a new competitor, since. I mean, there have been, but nowhere near on the level of, every other console on this list. And, yeah, I will admit, okay, I'm a little bit biased with this because you guys know how much I fucking love Halo. It's one of my favorite franchises of all time, and that came from this. And there were also some other pretty cool games that were on the original Xbox that have been kind of forgotten to time. Like that Crimson Skies game, for example, which is a cool sort of like arcadey, flight combat game. A lot of people do love Fable. That also came from this, even though I don't particularly care for it. But to each their own. But I guess it's a good console. I just feel like that. I don't know. Original Xbox is a weird console in a lot of ways. Is that like I think it just relied too heavily on specifically like the adult male demographic, that it kind of compromised on games for like kids, which is why I praise the PlayStation 1 and 2, is because they were able to appeal to pretty much anyone. If you weren't someone who cared for Crash or Spyro, that's fine. You had Resident Evil and you had Silent Hill. But if you didn't care for horror games, well, you still had your straight up action games like Metal Gear Solid or Siphon Filter. And you even had some decent console ports for some games that were on PC, like that were originally on PC that were ported over the PlayStation. Or if you were someone who wanted some RPGs, you had Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. So that's why I give a lot of credit to the PlayStation 1, and of course by extension the PlayStation 2, because it did the same thing. If you want like, some, kid-friendly platformers, you had, the first Jak and Daxter, and you had God damn it, why can't I think of any others? But yeah, Jak and Daxter. If you wanted something that was a bit more serious, and more like, shooter friendly, I guess you got Ratchet and Clank. If you wanted some RPGs, you had Final Fantasy 10 and Kingdom Hearts. If you wanted some more, stealth action, you had Sly Cooper and Metal Gear Solid again. So it's like there was a lot of variety in that regard, but I don't think the Xbox really had that. And also, well, the Duke controller being notoriously way too big, which is the same problem that the Dreamcast had, and a bunch of these other consoles. First impressions matter. So it's still a console I do respect. Hell, I've been collecting quite a few Xbox games, like in the past like year or so. Like, I don't know if you can see, but like I've got quite a few Xbox original games right there that are backwards compatible with my 360 that I've been collecting. And yeah, they've been fun. Even if most of them are games that I have the ability to play on PlayStation 2, just the better frame rate on 360 is something that I want to take advantage of. But yeah, you get the point. Is good console, but in my opinion, it doesn't do as well as the PlayStation 2 or the GameCube. So that's just me personally. And well, that then gets us into the only major handheld of this era, the Game Boy Advance, or the Game Boy Advance GBA, which this is going to surprise some people. I'm going to put this in S tier. As far as handheld consoles are concerned, yeah, no, I think this is one of the best ones ever made. I mean, it helps that, like, this is essentially a Super Nintendo, but handheld. But I do genuinely think that some of the best games have ever been made were, funny enough, on this little device right here. You had a lot of really cool exclusive versions of, console games on here. Like, for example, obviously a lot of people love Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, right? Well, the GBA version's actually not a bad version, even if it's very different. Like, I thought it was a pretty cool game. Also, of course, the Metroid games that were on here, fantastic. The Castlevania games fucking slapped on this game, on this console, excuse me. So, yeah, like, a solid experience all around. And, well, it was the last iteration of the Game Boy family and was backwards compatible with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. So at the end of the day, massive win in those regards. So, which I forgot to mention, the PlayStation 2 was also backwards compatible with PlayStation 1 games. Just to throw that out there. All right. 7th gen. The generation, which funny enough, I actually own all of the main 3 consoles. They're behind my PC right there, but yeah, I've got Wii right there, PlayStation 3 right there, Xbox 360 right there. Which is kind of weird because yeah, that's the only console generation where I actually own all the main 3 consoles. Hell, I even have my PSP back there somewhere. Oh, it's right there. Okay. Yeah, I just had it lying around. So this, I feel like, is going to be the most controversial because I think no matter what I say, I'm going to piss people off. Because, yeah. Okay. So let's start off with the Xbox 360. And this is where things are going to get a bit contentious with people. Xbox 360? Okay, I'm actually gonna rank both the Wii and the Xbox 360 first. I think I need to explain myself with this one. Okay. Xbox 360 and the Wii. These are going in B tier. The PlayStation 3. This is gonna piss so many people off. But let me explain myself. Okay, so Xbox 360. So I actually do think that it is an overall way better console than the original Xbox. Like, you know, it has a better UI, has a way better controller. You know, some of the absolute best bangers you can ever ask for. I mean, Halo 3 and Reach automatically, you know, gives me high respect for this console. Also, the Gears of War trilogy, the original, amazing. Forza Motorsports, really fun. However, those are like the only real exclusives that were really big with this console. I mean, yeah, you had Fable 2 and 3, but again, I didn't really care for those as much. And yeah, you had Xbox Live Arcade, but, well, guess what? A lot of those games were also on the PlayStation 3. But the reason why I want to put this console in A tier, you have no idea. I don't get it twisted. I really, really wanted to put this in A tier. But there's 2 major problems as to why I'm only putting this in a B tier. Okay, 3. Number 1. Paying to play online. The Xbox 360 was the first console to have it to where if you want to play online with other people, you gotta pay up. Which, fundamentally, I find to be really fucking greedy and stupid. Like, because PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast and even the original Xbox allowed for you to be able to play online, no charge. They worked perfectly fine. PlayStation 3 and the Wii also allowed you to play online, no charge. But the 360 had to come in and ruin everyone's fun by adding in the Xbox Live Gold subscription service, which made you have to play online. And, well, that resulted in these many subscription services that we see nowadays. That is an unforgivable sin that I have to give shit. I have to throw a little bit shade. Number 2, the Red Ring of Death issue. The Xbox 360 was notorious in the late 2000s with its original model for constantly breaking so many goddamn times. Hell, my cousins had to go through 3 Xbox 360s. Like, it was ridiculous for them. Thankfully, I ended up, like, the 360 that we've had was one of the newer models, released around 2010. 2009. I think. It's one of the black models. So we never encountered that problem, but the fact that there were so many issues with that original Xbox 360, like, involving the Red Ring of Death, that became a massive problem, that's something I cannot forgive. And then number 3, the latter half of the Xbox 360 was garbage, specifically involving the Kinect and the stupid marketing that, like, Microsoft was doing with that console, where they were trying to make it more as a family thing. It honestly paralleled a lot of the problems that Sega was dealing with back in the 90s with the Genesis, where the Genesis was a solid console, but that second half of the stupid add-ons ruined it. And ultimately, I think that's what happened with the 360. And, well, Microsoft has been trying to play catch-up since. So, that is why I cannot, in good faith, put it higher than a B. I wish I was able to, but I just can't. And I have to preface right now. People on YouTube, stop with the Xbox 360, like, worshipping. I actually am starting to get fucking pissed about that. Because it's like, it's a flawed console. Hell, I'll even say this. I love the PlayStation 2. It had way too many shovelware games. It also was not as powerful as the GameCube or the original Xbox. But I still love it. I'm at least honest with myself about something that I love, because I'm willing to acknowledge the flaws. But for whatever reason, people just forget that the 360 had massive problems. And I don't get it. I genuinely don't get it. Like, this is not even me being, like, a Sony fanboy, because even though I like Sony products, they have been fucking up as well recently, but we'll get to that we'll get to that later. But in any event, like, the 360, it's definitely Microsoft's best console. I will give them that. But to say that it's the best console ever made, I can never agree to that. Now, that being said, that then leads us into the Wii. So, we're going to talk about the Wii first. I know the PS3 came out first, but we'll get to that later. So, the Wii, funny enough, I remember we got this back in Christmas 2006. I remember me and my cousins were extremely excited about getting this. This was such a treat to have. Like, because, I remember we all opened up our presents, and, our aunt and uncle, like, my aunt and my uncle were watching, and they gave us, like, all of us presents, and we opened it at the same time, and it turned out it was a bunch of Wii. It was the Wii and the Wii accessories, which was insane. And I will say, like, at the time, that was pretty exciting. And truth be told, the Wii does have some absolute bangers on it. You know, you had Mario Kart Wii. You had Wii Sports, which is the most liked casual game ever made. Not that I'm saying that's a bad thing, I'm just pointing that out. You also had stuff like Monster Hunter Tri. You had Metroid Prime 3. You had both Legend of Zelda, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. Like, some games that a lot of people regard as being some of the best ever made. But here's the thing. After a couple of years, like I say, like up until around 2009, 2010, we stopped playing the Wii. Like, we just didn't really play it as often as in comparison to the PlayStation 2 that we had. Like, I was glued to my PlayStation 2 until I finally got a PlayStation 3 right at the tail end of its life cycle. And it's ultimately because, well, the Wii, as much as I do praise the games, and I will even say this, the controller was pretty cool. It's, very simple, but there's a lot packed onto the actual controller itself. And of course, combined with the nunchuck here, offers a lot of gameplay variety. But you're already kind of seeing part of the problem here. And I've said this before, this is a kind of a gimmick console where it is way too reliant on its motion controls rather than the gameplay itself. And, well, that's kind of why when I finally got the current Wii that I have now, because keep in mind, this is not the original Wii that I owned, because we sold that years ago. I just so happened to get myself a new Wii. But that's ultimately why I ended up getting, like, basically a GameCube Wii controller. Because, sometimes you just want to play a game normally. You don't want to be relying so much on the gimmick of motion controls. Because it fundamentally, that gimmick only, lasts for so long, and you can only tolerate it for such a short amount of time. And most gamers just prefer playing with a regular controller anyways. And I think that was ultimately, and also, this console was also notorious for having some of the worst, shovelware ever for a game console. So, ultimately, that is, at least in my opinion, the biggest, those are some of the biggest flaws. Is that, and, well, along with that, not, this, the Wii is just a glorified GameCube. It really was not graphically all that impressive, at least in hindsight. It was easily weaker than both the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And because of that, you didn't really see a lot of third-party support. Or at least a lot of third-party support that was on the same level as the other consoles. So, yeah, in a weird twist of fate, I gotta say it, the PlayStation 3, even though it's the third in a console trilogy, and a lot of people do give this console a lot of shade, I do think it's the best out of that era. Which I know people are gonna shit me on that because, well, people don't like the PlayStation 3. I don't think I've seen a single tier list on YouTube that has put the PlayStation 3 above the 360. I know exactly why, though. It's because the console launch was terrible. It, again, was a console that unfortunately was way too expensive for the time. That I will understand. But here's the problem. That was the only problem with the console, is that it was just too expensive. It wasn't even something like the like the Neo Geo or like the 3DO or something like that, where it's like it didn't have like the support alongside with it being too expensive. Because yes, it was $600 in 2006 money, which that's not good optics. But I mean, let's also compare it to the prices of whenever like the 360 and the Wii came out. Because the Wii, the reason why that was so successful, was that it was only 300. Yeah, it was only $300. 360, only 400. Oh, the PS3 was 600 for the 60 gigabyte model, and then 500 for the 20 gigabyte model. Okay. I think. Okay. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the numbers here, but yeah, I think that makes sense. But here's my counter to that. The Neo Geo in 1990 money for 600 was a ripoff. No one in their right mind would buy a console back in the early 90s for that much money. And I will admit, $500 for a PlayStation 3, like for a console for 2006, that is a hard pill to swallow a little bit. I mean, hell, that's how much the PlayStation 5 costed whenever it came out. But it's not. That's the only problem with the console. Like, if I'm going to be honest, that's the only real issue that like I saw this console having, was that it was just a bit too. It was just a little bit overpriced. Not extremely overpriced, but just overpriced so much that people ignored the console. But I would argue that the PlayStation 3, not only has it aged better over time, well, not only that, but also they cut the price in half in the middle of the console's life cycle. So it went from the $600 for the 60 gigabyte to $300. Yeah, they had to remove the backwards compatibility, which I will admit that's also pretty dumb. As a console itself, it had some of the best exclusives you can offer. Look at this. Look at my shelf. Also, an entire row of just PlayStation 3 games. And you got some, like I said, some of the absolute best exclusives on there. You got Killzone, you got Infamous, you got Resistance, you got the Ratchet & Clank Future Trilogy, Metal Gear Solid 4, God of War 3, White Knight Chronicles, so Little Big Planet, and even a lot of the games that were on the 360, they were on the PlayStation 3. Like, you had your Call of Duties, you had your Assassin's Creeds, you had your Battlefields, you had your Rainbow Sixes on there, you had your Far Cries. So I just don't like the fact that, like, there's been a lot, because here's the thing, I've seen motherfuckers put this shit in, like, F tier. It is nowhere near an F tier at all. You have to be insane. Are you kidding me? So, no. In my opinion, the PlayStation 3 it gets way too much fucking shit. It is, in my opinion, one of the most overhated consoles of all time. Like, it's a damn good console, and I will if I have to die in my grave to defend the PlayStation 3, I fucking will. I think it's a good console. Is it as good as the PlayStation 2? No. And hell, like, I'm willing to criticize the console for a multitude of reasons. But it is not a bad console. I am tired of hearing that sort of like narrative being thrown around. I will not tolerate PlayStation 3 slander. We will not tolerate PlayStation 3 slander in this household. So, and like I said, the online was free, so I was able to play Black Ops 2 online. So that's always fun. So, well, until the stupid username glitch thing, but that's not the console itself. That's Sony's stupid decision. Well, and Activision, but anyways. That then leads us into the handhelds. Nintendo DS and the PSP. This one's going to be another hot take, but, and this is going to piss some people off, actually, okay, before I move those down, I think I'm going to have to be a bit honest with myself, and I'm going to have to, like, lower a few of the consoles, or, like, raise a few. Oh, no, I'll do that at the end of this. Okay. DS. This is not going to be a popular stream. Oh my god. I hope this isn't going to turn out to be like my stupid fucking, like, I'm just hoping that people aren't going to treat this like they've been doing with my retro shooter tier list. I swear to god. But anyways, so okay. I think they're on the I think the PSP and the DS are on the equal playing field. The DS, okay. Why am I putting it that low in C tier? Well, there's a reason for that. Because, well, we used to have a Nintendo DS. But not one. But not two. But not three. But not four. We went through 5 of these. We went through 5 Nintendo DS's. In the span of like 9 years. This thing kept breaking for whatever reason. And we weren't even harsh on this. We were as gentle as we could be. And despite all of that, this thing kept breaking on us. Actually, well, no, okay, I'm not gonna lower it to D tier because there's some good games that came from this, like Scribblenauts and the Zelda exclusives, but I'm borderline putting this on D tier because like this was a massive downgrade in my opinion compared to the Game Boy Advance. There is no reason as to why we should have went through that many of these consoles. Like, yeah, they made the screen way too fragile with this. So, I'm sorry, but we were, like, as gentle as we could with our consoles. I was a kid. I didn't take care of my shit back then. But the one thing I did take care of were my video games. I made sure that the PlayStation 2 was working. I made sure that the games were mostly working. So like I treat this as like you know, historic relics from like ancient like Egyptian times. I do not mess with my video games. So the fact that like we've had multiple instances of the screens breaking with the DS, I'm sorry, but like that is a at that point, that is a fundamental design flaw. So I can't. As for the PlayStation Portable, this one is less to do with the actual console itself, because I think the PlayStation Portable, being a direct competitor to like the DS, I think was actually a pretty good thing on Sony's when it came, yeah, like on Sony's part. I think that like it holds well. Hell, I even have one. We've had this shit since launch, I think. Or at least pretty close to it. So yeah, like, you know, I've had this for almost 20 years. Like, I like the way that it holds. You know, it's pretty small. It's a big screen. And got memory card stick right here. You can take out the battery and exchange it. Typical of the mid-2000s. And discs based. Yeah, it's disc based here, which, you know, I could have preferred it if it was a cartridge, but, you know, you can do whatever. Also, you heard that, right? Sounds like an M1. I don't know. I always liked that for whatever weird reason. Just that ping of the metal. It kind of reminds me of an M1 like Garand. I don't know. I just thought it's a cool quirk of the console that I like. But this unfortunately does have one fundamental problem. Not the console itself, but the games just were not it with this thing. At least in comparison to other handhelds. Like, even games that like I like from this system are more so guilty pleasures. I wouldn't particularly say that the PlayStation Portable had like really stand out exclusives except for Daxter. That, and like maybe Star Wars Renegade Squadrons, but like that's stretching it. So yeah, like, and Elite Squadron, I guess, but yeah, like, it's kind of a hard. I guess this one is just more. It's just a guilty pleasure of mine. I like the PSP. It's extremely flawed, but like, I don't know. I like the console, so I might raise it up to B tier, but I acknowledge it's a harder sell. All right. That then gets us into the 8th generation. So the Wii U, the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and, well, the Switch as Nintendo's second attempt. So, well, it's good to know that some history is repeated, because, well, Atari did the same shit. Okay, Wii U. D tier. Xbox One, C tier. Borderline D tier as well. PlayStation 4, B tier. And the Switch, also a B tier. And you know what? As far as the handhelds, 3DS, B tier. But the Vita, I'm putting that shit in A tier. So, okay. I don't think I need to, like, explain why the Wii U was a failure. It confused people because of its name, because they thought that it was, like, an add-on to the Wii, which, again, the Wii was already kind of, you know, losing its luster by this point. The controller, which, yes, that massive screen right there, that's the controller. What the hell? Why? Like, I don't know. Like, and again, this thing just did not have the support, like, that it desperately needed from third party. Like, it actually had less support than the original Wii did. And, the motion controls were way more limited on this, so it didn't even have the same gimmick that the Wii had. Like, here's something that, like, a lot of people, here's a hot take that I do have, but you can probably already see with this, like, even though I like the GameCube and I like the Game Boy Advance, those were not as successful as a lot of people, like, think. And honestly, when you look at sales numbers, the Wii honestly was a fluke. Like, the fact that, like, Nintendo went through the N64 and then the GameCube being, financial disappointments in a lot of like, in their eyes, and then, the Wii being a massive success, but then following up with another disaster of a console launch, it really does showcase just how much of a fluke this console was. Like, the Wii was. Because, man, the way in which this console launched was terrible. And like I said, that games didn't really help with that either. Like, maybe, like, Mario Kart 8? But that's about it, Chief. Like, there was just nothing that the console even ever offered. So, yeah, like, in good faith and in good consciences, I have to put it in D tier. Like, it is really, at least in my opinion, the most recent example of, like, a big video game disaster. At least when it comes to the consoles themselves. Well, oh shit, but the launch of the newer consoles is pretty bad too, but we'll get to those. So, but then that leads us to the Xbox One, where this one is basically just death by 1,000 paper cuts. Because, well, again, third console by a company usually has problems. Which I know the PlayStation 3 third console, which that one also did have problems, and because of that, people shit on that console for unfair reasons. But the Xbox One, again, death by 1,000 paper cuts. They continued the stupid marketing of having this be a family console compared to everything else that they were doing. Like, or not really a family console, but just like a family, like, device rather than a games console. And, well, it didn't help that in the E3 2013 conference, which was a disaster for Microsoft, they announced that any game that you bought was automatically locked to the specific console that it was first used in. That is terrible. Granted, they have since backtracked that, and you can play your discs in whatever fashion you want, but that was terrible PR for them nonetheless, and has affected them the entire console generation. Not to mention that, well, we saw that trend a little bit with the 360, but it was solidified that the Xbox One just straight up did not give you a reason to even want to buy a single console from them. Like, every single game that was released on this console, like, unless if you were Halo 5 or you were a Forza Horizon game, you got that shit on PC or PlayStation. And even in some instances, you even got it on the Wii U and the Switch. So, there was no reason, not a reason, as to why, like, there's no excuse, is basically what I'm trying to say. Yeah, there's no excuse for this console. Like, it was just a disaster, I feel like, overall. Like, again, that's kind of why I'm teetering on C or D. And that then gets us into the controller. What the hell is the Xbox One controller? It feels cheap. Like, granted, I don't own an Xbox One, but I remember my cousins, like, that's the console that they prefer, and I'm sorry if I'm shitting on the Xbox One, Brody, I'm sorry. but it's such a cheap. It felt so cheap to like use. Like I don't know how to describe it. It just felt off. It just felt off. So I don't know. To me personally, I I think this was definitely like a major step down. Like, and granted, like Xbox, like Microsoft was already kind of fumbling a little bit. So, yeah. And then that gets into the PlayStation 4, which I put it in a B tier. Again, I think I like the PlayStation 4 whenever I had it. I don't have it anymore because I replaced it with my PlayStation 5. Because all the games that I wanted are backwards compatible anyways. But I mean, you guys remember me streaming a lot on this console. So like it does hold a bit of sentimental value to me because this was the console that got me into live streaming, of course. And so naturally, because of that, I am going to tolerate a bit more. But I am going to be truthful when I say that it definitely is a console that I do feel like does suffer from modern gaming syndrome, where it's less. I feel like the console itself, it's a good console, but it just doesn't really. I feel like there should have just been a bit more innovation to it. Like, I mean, yeah, the speaker on the controller was cool, but like that's ultimately what it really offered. That and also just a massive price decrease. Because I'm not gonna lie, even the exclusives on this console, I don't think were as standoutish compared to previous generations of PlayStation consoles. So it was a really good console. For playing online though. Like that is something that I will cherish. Is my online experiences in all the Call of Duty and Battlefield matches that I've been in, absolutely worth it. So it's good enough in that regard. And then we've got ourselves the Nintendo Switch, which this one I will admit I don't have as much experience with. So, and also it's kind of funny that like, you know, Nintendo has 2 slots for the 8th gen. This is not considered a 9th gen console. It's considered 8th gen still. Kind of like with the 5200 with Atari, even though the 2600's 2nd gen. But I mean, I think this is definitely a step up compared to both the Wii and the Wii U. Because with this, actually, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to raise this. I'm going to put this in A tier. I think the Switch has really proven itself to be something that, like, I think was really warranted. Granted, it is starting to show its age, because this is still the supported console, which, I mean, yeah, they're still supporting the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, but PlayStation 5 and that series is definitely what Sony and Microsoft are focusing on. Nintendo is still, you know, focused with this. It is starting to show its age, like, with its graphics, which it's always had pretty weak graphics. That's the one downside with the Switch. That and also some of the online crap, but as far as, you know, being able, like, you were able to basically play like every single Wii U that mattered, like Wii U game that mattered, it was brought over to Switch, which was a big brain move on Nintendo's part. But this was also the console that was a hybrid console. It was not just a dedicated games console, it was also a handheld console, which I think was a pretty ingenious move, especially since they were starting to phase away from, like, especially since, you know, by the late 2010s, handheld devices, handheld consoles just were finally starting to be phased out. So to have, but, well, what do you have in replacement if you don't want to just use your phone because, like, mobile gaming is garbage. What do you do instead? Well, how about you make the console both, like, just straight up both? And that was pretty good. Like, keep in mind, whenever this released, I was heavily in my anti-Nintendo phase. And so I did not give a shit about this console when it came out. But I think over time, I've definitely grown to appreciate, like, the tech that is behind the console. Even though that it has the Joy-Con drift issue and the online stuff does have issues, I do think out of the 8th gen, this has been the console that, like, stood up above the rest. So I gotta give credit where credit is due. And then that leads us into the the final handhelds, the 3DS and the Vita, which basically they're basically just direct upgrades compared to the previous things. But the reason why I put the Vita above the 3DS is, well, because the Vita had a lot of really cool exclusives, or even just ports of games that were released on PlayStation 3 at the time. I mean, you had some Uncharted stuff on there, but, well, I mean, you had Sly Cooper and you had Shantae Half Gene here on there, so, like, how can I say no to that? Being able to play those on the go. I'm biased, but also, I think overall, this is just a good, like, portable console if you want to play a lot of your favorite games just on the go. Since a lot, and I mean a lot, of PlayStation 2 titles and a lot of cool exclusives were actually, like, brought over into this. So I think it admittedly is less to do. Oh, and also the fact that you can use it to interact, like, in certain games from both the PS3 and the PS4 was pretty cool. But I don't know. I guess I just like the novelty of it. And like I said, and also this uses cartridges instead of discs, which I think works way better for a handheld. Not that, like, the discs aren't cool here, and, well, get the ping from the PSP, but it does come at the cost of having to, like, buy storage devices like this. And, this bullshit here. Whereas it's a lot more convenient by having the cartridges instead of, like, the dedicated discs. Especially since, technology has heavily improved to where you can have, like, massive games on cartridges anyways. So at the end of the day, I think it was definitely for the best. And yes, I do consider it to be the second best, or one of the best handheld game, like, consoles ever made, alongside the GBA and, by extension, the Nintendo Switch. And then that gets us into our last 3DS. I don't have too much to say other than, like, it's just a DS but better. That then gets us into the last pairing, the Xbox Series X, and by extension the S, versus the PlayStation 5. Well, I think what I'm going to say about the Series console... Actually, what I'm going to say about both these consoles are actually going to be very similar to each other. C tier for the Series X. But you know what? I'm gonna give the PS5 a low A, but a very low A. The reason why I am not a big fan of the Series console is that it's basically just a glorified PlayStation, or not, it's just a glorified Xbox One. It does not offer anything unique. It still has a lack of exclusives because even all the games that Microsoft has ended up buying, it just does not have, like, direct Xbox Series support. Like, it is still a console that I feel like they are just making out of obligation. And there's a lot of rumors that this is going to be Microsoft's last console because they are way more focused on Game Pass than anything else. And, console numbers were already going down, so they might be just going the way of Sega. Who knows if that's going to be the case? But either way, I might end up getting a series console, but I just have not seen a reason to do so. And that's pretty sad. It also doesn't help with a lot of the bullshit that Microsoft has been pulling for the past couple years, that it's been a bit of a problem with them. And then that gets us into the PlayStation 5. Why am I putting this in A tier? Well, because I feel like that this is basically what a PlayStation... This is basically, yes, a PlayStation 4 Plus, but I think there's just enough things that are offered here that I think it is way more warranted. So, first of all, the controller. They overhauled the controller to where it's not just the same thing that they've been doing for the past, 25 years. They actually added in a ton of new features that were jam-packed into this thing, including the rumble. Even though I will admit, yes, it is a bit of a gimmick, it is something that helps make the console a bit more immersive. And it's also helped by the fact that there are plenty of games that have the trigger grips be used as a mechanic, as opposed to just something that you press in a game. You actually have to the adaptive triggers is what I'm trying to say. I'm sorry. I think that's pretty cool. But also, some of the exclusives have been fantastic so far. Demon Souls remake, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, have been very fantastic. A lot of people also do like Horizon Forbidden West, even though I know that, yeah, that's on PS4 now, but we're talking strictly here. And, well, I think what really did, put me onto the side with PlayStation 5 here is, well, the fact that, in the past year or two, Sony have finally offered, at least a quasi backwards compatibility option that is a reasonable one. It is not perfect. It's not something that, I would say, praise, over the hills, over, because, it still has its problems. But the fact that, at least Sony is willing to re-release a lot of PlayStation 2 games onto that console, onto the PlayStation 5 here, and is offering, only $5 to $10 for most of those games, which is very reasonable if you ask me, I think is a much better deal than Microsoft just shutting down all support for backwards compatibility, or Nintendo forcing it down a stupid subscription service. Granted, PlayStation has also had its problems with its subscription service. I had to cancel my PlayStation Plus because it just got too expensive, which is why I'm putting this in the lower part of A tier. So, whatever, you get the point. I think the console itself is good, and that's why I have to give it praise. So, it's a good console. And I would highly recommend you guys, get a PS5 if you guys can. So, but either way, yeah, that I think is the tier list. And, well, I think we finally got this evened out. So yeah, no, in my opinions, my favorite consoles, funny enough, is the PlayStation 2, the SNES, and the Game Boy Advance, which is really weird. So, though, I think I'm gonna raise, those up. Yes, I'm a bit biased with some. There's some people who are booing right now. I'm sorry, I just like Sony consoles. Though I am willing to admit whenever they do have their flaws. And again, I'm not like, God, now people are going to call me a Sony employee. I just like their consoles. And it's just the consoles it's just the brand that I grew up with. And I just overall prefer a lot of their products over some of the other companies. Although Nintendo, I have grown on significantly. Because again, I used to hate Nintendo. But now I do actually consider Nintendo to be pretty cool. So, but yeah, I'd say like, yeah, I'd say these are like the tierings. Yeah, I'd say these are like fair tierings. I wouldn't say the ones in the middle are in any particular order, although I am going to put, yeah, you up there, up there. The 360's better than that. Wii's better. NES. Game Gear. Yeah, I think that's a good tiering right there. And then I will say I do think the Series X is better than the Xbox One. I will at least agree to that. Boy. Good. And yeah, all these older consoles I'm willing to have in C tier, but yeah. Yeah, I would rather play those. Yeah, I think that's... Yeah, I'd say that those are accurate. So, but yeah, there you go. That is the console tier list. So, okay, not necessarily low-key. Turns out this was still a 3-hour stream. But at least I got my thoughts laid out here. And yeah, I'm pretty happy about that. But before we go over that, I have to address something, because this is something that's been on my mind for like almost a month now, and it's really starting to piss me off. So I'm just gonna do this. Okay. So, and I will even save this part as a separate VOD. So, as you guys know, I recently re-uploaded all of the other tier list episodes onto YouTube for documentation sake, and just for, you know, everything, like, you know, just trying to get everything on here, because these streams take a lot of research and a lot of time, and it's a series that I'm passionate about. I've been doing it since 2020, and it's a series that I still want to continue doing. However, I have noticed that on certain tier lists that, well, and granted, this isn't something that's been new, because I've had the same problem pop up in our music tier lists. But now I have noticed that other tier lists have had issues with people, you know, mass downvoting and just straight up giving just straight up hate comments on multiple of my videos. Which I have to ask why. Because not only were they re-uploads of sometimes streams that were made years ago, and I even specified at the beginning of every single one of those videos, because I try to lay it clear that my personal takes are not the same as they are currently. Because, and I've even done many Redux streams to try to get people caught up. Like, And again, I'm not talking about the people who are casually watching, or even just the people who are, just, giving general advice. Like, that's fine. As a matter of fact, like, I'll even say this. Like, anyone who doesn't like the length of these streams, that is completely fine. I understand, like, some people may not like long-form content, and they prefer to have tier lists only done in, like, 10-15 minutes. I just like doing them in longer sections because I like explaining my reasonings, and I like being able to just do topics on like a mass scale, because I try to make sure that like I'm as thorough with my research on a particular topic, because I'm someone who is very passionate about this stuff. That being said, I'm not going to tolerate people who are just going to be, watching a video and just skipping to the end and not even getting the full context as to why I even have a tier. Granted, I will admit part of that is because I have not been very good at putting timestamps on every particular stream. But again, that's partially because of how long the streams have. I've got a lot of things that I'm very busy about when it comes to my personal life, whether it be school, whether it be working on other projects, whether it be even trying to find a job. I am not someone who has had a lot of time being able to do that. And to have people just come in and just straight up just call me just straight up the worst shit you can ever imagine, I'm not gonna fucking tolerate that shit. Like, I don't know why it is so fucking hard for people to not, like, I don't know why it's so hard for people to understand that all of this shit is just my personal opinion. If you disagree, that is fine. You can even express if you disagree. I'm not shitting on, like, a lot of people. Like, I'm only shitting on people whenever I'm joking. Because I joke. I make quirky comments. If you get so and this is now me being serious, if you get so butthurt that I don't like some random obscure like mid-90s shooter or some random ass band from the middle of fucking Minnesota, then like, I'm sorry, but that's more of a reflection on you as a person rather than me. Because for some weird reason, those re-uploads have seen massive downvotes. And not only that, but just straight up pessimistic, like, just, dipshit, like, language that's been used. I'm not gonna repeat some of the shit that's being there. You can probably imagine they're saying some straight up racial slur shit on some of my fucking videos. So, unfortunately, I wanted to have this series as like a bit of a conversation so that I can have, share my own thoughts. But if people are gonna be a bunch of crybabies and they're gonna be a bunch of fucking, assholes about it, I'm just gonna have to turn off the comments on the re-uploads, which sucks because I don't want to do that. But if that shit's gonna fucking continue, then I will have to do that. And if there's gonna be motherfuckers who are just gonna keep mass downloading my videos, well, I'm just gonna be re-uploading those videos and like redoing that until you guys leave me alone. Because I just want to have fucking fun, and I don't want to have to fucking deal with assholes on the internet who think that they are right and that I'm wrong just because I don't just because I don't like the same exact fucking things that you do. So, I'm sorry if that makes me sound like a bit of a douchebag, but at least I'm someone who is willing to not, talk shit on anyone else who has a differing opinion on mine. Because, let's just be real here, some of my friends, they like some of the shit that I absolutely fucking despise. And there's some shit that, I like that they don't particularly care for either. but that's called being a human fucking being. So grow the fuck up and realize that not everyone has to like the same shit that you do. And if you can't agree with that, well then good luck fucking, being stuck in your goddamn, house for the next fucking 40 years of your non-existent life. So if you want to be a loser, you can. So, but anyways, enough. Let's try to lighten up the mood. It's just, I am not tolerating that shit anymore. I've had way too much of that bullshit happen on multiple different platforms for other unrelated reasons. I'm not gonna fucking, have people try to do any of that shit. So, but in any event, I hope you guys did thoroughly enjoy watching this. Again, I'm sorry about that rant. It's just, there's idiots online. But either way, I hope you guys did enjoy. If you guys did, and you're watching this on Twitch, of course, hit that follow button down below and turn the bell icon. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon. Granted, this is going to be on the archive channel, so it's not going to really matter about too many uploads there. But for those who just watch on YouTube and not Twitch, whatever. And, well, if you guys want to directly support me on Twitch, of course, you can hit that subscribe button. If you can't do that, that's completely fine. I'm just glad the guys can watch this regardless. But if you guys want to, do other stuff, that's fine. But sorry, I'm just trying to think about what I'm trying to say. But either way, I hope to see you guys on the next one. Again, I doubt I'm going to be streaming tomorrow. I will be streaming on Friday, though, because, well, let's just say that there is a pretty big thing that's going to happen on Friday that I want to make sure that I get to for you guys. So, excuse me. But in any event, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Have a good night, and peace out. Bye.